right, well, hey, today we're continuing our series, Dreamer, where we've been going through the life of a man named Joseph, a life of a man whose life was anything but easy. He faced unexpected turns, he faced difficult circumstances, but despite it all, he maintained faith in God and lived a life of integrity. He maintained his faith in God and lived a life of integrity even when he was sold into slavery by his brothers who were jealous of him and hated him. He maintained faith in God and lived a life of integrity even when he was in a man's house named Potiphar, who he was in slavery to. And even when Potiphar's wife was tempting him day after day, even when she grabbed him, wanting him to sleep with her, even then, when he was falsely accused, like Joseph maintained faith in God and lived a life of integrity. Joseph maintained faith in God and lived a life of integrity when he was in the prison. When he was in the prison after he had been falsely accused. We looked at this last week. And overall, he was in this season of waiting for 13 years. 13 years between the time that he was in Potiphar's house as a slave and when he was in prison. 13 years. I mean, this guy, man, he's been through it. And his life inspires us to see that whatever we go through, we too can maintain faith in God and live a life of integrity. And there is so much that we can learn from Joseph's life. We've learned so much already in the 3 weeks that we've already been in this series. But today, before we see the next scene in the movie of his life, if you will, I want to come back to how we began this series. If you remember the way that we began this series in week 1, which, by the way, if you weren't here, if you missed that series opener, part 1, that's okay. You can always go online to hermitagehills.com and you can catch up on any message that you've missed. But the way that we began that series is Joseph's life is as I told you, I challenged you, I reminded you that his life that we read about in Scripture is not simply or even primarily recorded for us in the Bible so that we can be inspired. Like, that's not the main reason that his life is recorded in the Bible, is so that we can be inspired. Like, that's not the primary reason it's there. Yes, it's inspiring, but the reason that Joseph's story is primarily included in the Bible, the main reason, is because God desires for us to know what it is that he was doing after sin entered the world. And God wants us to know what it is that he was doing after sin entered the world to rescue humanity from their sin. What was God doing to save humanity from their sin and to bring them back into a relationship with him? And what we saw that first week, we talked about this, that after sin entered the world, God went to a man whose name became Abraham and he made him a promise. And then Abraham had Isaac. Isaac had Jacob, who had his name changed to Israel. And Israel, Jacob, he had 12 sons. And one of those sons is Joseph. And God's plan to the problem of sin was to rescue the world through creating a people known as Israel, through whom which he would reveal himself, explain to them, show them how they were to relate to him, and then through whom the Messiah would one day come. Jesus would one day come to rescue the world from their sin. And so God's plan is that he would do something about the sin problem and rescue people. And the Old Testament, Genesis through the Old Testament, and then in the New Testament, we read about Jesus coming. Like, God was faithful to fulfill his promise that he made to Abraham, that then was carried through Isaac and Jacob, and Joseph was a part of that story. Joseph's story is a part of that greater story of God and what God was doing since sin entered the world. Which means, yes, we can read Joseph's story and we can learn things and apply things to our life just like we've done every week, and we're going to do it again today. But I just wanted to make sure that you knew. I just wanted to remind you and explain for the first time, if this is your first time, tuning in, that the primary reason that Joseph's story is included in the Bible is so that we will see that he's a part of God's greater plan, the greater story of rescuing humanity. And God is going to use Joseph to bring about the establishment of the people of Israel so that then he can reveal himself to them. So then, when Joseph has a dream about how one day his family is going to bow down to him, that too is a small part of God's plan and how he's going to rescue humanity. And we've been on this roller coaster for the past 3 weeks in Joseph's life, right? Like, after it's revealed in week 1 that God had given Joseph a dream, and if we know that Joseph's story is a part of the greater story of God, after the last 3 weeks, it's like, well, how? Like, what we should be asking is, God, how are you going to fulfill that promise if Joseph is supposed to be part of the story? Because it sure doesn't look like there's going to be resolve, that there's going to be resolution here. It doesn't look like Joseph has a hope or a prayer. Like 13 years have gone by and Joseph is still in prison. And the question is like, how will Joseph get out of these unfortunate situations he continually finds himself in, even though he does nothing to deserve it? Like, if Joseph is a part of how God would rescue the world, he's a part of that greater story. Like, God, are you sleeping on Joseph? Or how in the world are you going to bring something from this story? Because it doesn't look like you could bring anything from this story. Like, that's the tension that when you remember the purpose through which God included the story of Joseph, the primary story, that's the tension that we should all be wrestling with when we're reading through this story, when we're going through this story chapter by chapter. Yes, there's things to learn. We're going to see those today. But that tension is there. And today, that tension is going to be relieved. All right? For the past 3 weeks, we've seen so much tension. God, how? What are you doing? How? Today, I told you last week, spoiler alert, Joseph is going to get out of prison. Today, Joseph gets out of prison. In Genesis 41, we're going to see that. And you might say, well, how is he going to get out of prison? Well, that's what we're going to see right now, okay? So Genesis 41, last week we saw how when he's in prison, Pharaoh had sent his cupbearer and his baker to prison because they had crossed him, they had done something wrong. And in prison, the cupbearer and the baker have dreams. They have dreams. Joseph had a dream, the cupbearer and baker have a dream, and they tell their dream to Joseph. Joseph interprets their dreams, and here's what he says. Hey, baker, your luck has run out. You're going to be killed, all right? Pharaoh's going to kill you. That's what your dream means. But cupbearer, you are going to be put back into your position, and you're going to be good to go. And then Joseph looks at him and he says, hey, when that happens, remember me. Joseph says, remember me. To which the most tragic verse in chapter 40, verse 23 is that the cupbearer forgot Joseph. The cupbearer forgot Joseph. And so let's pick up the story right there, Genesis chapter 41, starting in verse 1. And here's what we read. When 2 full years had passed, that's 2 full years after the cupbearer was told not to forget Joseph. 2 years have gone by, and Joseph is still sitting in prison, forgotten. When 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. Here's another dream. See why this series is called Dreamer? There's a lot of dreams, all right? If you're not picking that up, now you are, okay? It's called Dreamer. So when 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile when out of the river there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed among the reeds. After them, 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came up out of the Nile and stood beside those on the riverbank. And the cows that were ugly and gaunt ate up the 7 sleek, fat cows. Then Pharaoh woke up. He fell asleep again, and he had a second dream. 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, were growing on a single stalk. After them, 7 other heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy, full heads. Then Pharaoh woke up. It had been a dream. In the morning, verse 8, his mind was troubled, so he sent for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but no one could interpret them for him. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, today I am reminded of my shortcomings. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had the dream that same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Now a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream. And things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us. I was restored to my position, the chief cupbearer was saying, and the other man, that is the baker, was impaled. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Now let's stop right there. If I'm Joseph, I think if you are Joseph, you're not so worried about the Pharaoh's dream. You're worried about where is that cupbearer that forgot me the past 2 years, right? It's like, hey, buddy, glad you remembered me 2 years later. Like, where you been, right? I mean, that's what I would be thinking, right? Where's the guy? Let me give him a piece of my mind. But Joseph doesn't do that. Of course he doesn't, because Joseph is a man of integrity, has deep faith in God. There's no bitterness in him. There's no thought that, the last thing I want to do for you, Pharaoh, is interpret your dream. Like, I just got out of this prison. I've shaved. I haven't shaved in years. I've got new clothes. I'm seeing the light of day for the first time in years. I've been in this deep, dark dungeon. Like, can I just chill and enjoy this? Like, he doesn't say that or think that at all. I wonder if, when he hears that Pharaoh has a dream, if that not only piques his interest, but it's further confirmation that once again, this is something that God has put in front of him. Because dreams are kind of a theme in Joseph's life. Almost as if, okay, well, God, this must be what you have for me, and so I'm going to listen to what Pharaoh has to say. And so Joseph doesn't respond in any of the ways that I said I might respond, or maybe that you would respond if you were in that moment. Here's what Joseph just does. Verse 16. Joseph says, I cannot do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. Joseph's not saying I'm unwilling to interpret. He's saying, hey, let me first just say publicly and out loud and remind myself that I don't have the ability to interpret these dreams. Interpretations belong to God. So anything I'm able to do is because God has gifted me to do it. And so he's showing his humility. He's giving credit to God for giving him the ability. And then he's saying, so go ahead, Pharaoh, tell me what you've got. And so Pharaoh tells him the dreams. Pharaoh tells him about the 7 fat cows who he saw in his dream that were eaten up by the 7 skinny cows. And he's like, well, I don't know what that means, And then he says, and hey, I have these 7 heads of full grain were eaten up by these 7 withered by the east wind, dead looking heads of grain. Like, can you help me understand why the dead, skinny, fat, not skinny, dead looking things are eating the healthy things? Like, what could that mean? Because my guys can't figure it out. But Joseph figures it out because God had given him the ability to interpret dreams, and so God gives him the interpretation. And let's see what Joseph says is the interpretation. Verse 25, then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years. It's one and the same dream. The 7 lean, ugly cows that came up afterward are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless heads of grain scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. It is just as I said to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered, because the famine that follows it will be so severe. The reason, look at this, the dream was given to Pharaoh in two forms, is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. Verse 33, and now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take a fifth of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the foods of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country, to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine. The plan, verse 37, seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials. So Pharaoh asked them, can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? Now let's pause right there. Again, if I'm Joseph, I'm like, no, you can't find anyone else like me. Pick me, right? Like, let me be the one that is the man that you're saying, can we find anyone like it? I'd be like, choose me. Why would I be saying choose me? Because I want to get out of prison, right? I've been in prison and in slavery for 13 years. And here's what we've got to realize. Up until this point, Joseph isn't out of the state of being a prisoner. He's just been brought up for a reprieve, got some nice clothes put on and got to shave, not because he's now a free man, but because he's going in the presence of Pharaoh and they wanted him to look presentable. But he's still a prisoner in this moment. All that we should be led to believe, and what the passage is leading us to believe, is that presumably he's going back down there once he gives this interpretation. So you would think he'd be like, I can do the job, right? But he doesn't do that. He doesn't say that. Even though Pharaoh gives him a carrot on the end of a string and says, can we find anyone like you in whom is the Spirit of God? And here's the reason Joseph doesn't vie for a place. Here's the reason Joseph doesn't volunteer himself. And it's so important. And it's so important to realize throughout this whole account of Joseph's life throughout Genesis. Joseph is never focused on controlling outcomes. Joseph is never focused on controlling outcomes. He's never focused on manipulating people or circumstances. He's never focused on taking advantage of even what seems like it wouldn't be taking advantage of a situation. It would just be taking what is his. He's never focused on trying to get his after he feels like he's not gotten his for 13 years. He just never does that. What is Joseph focused on? Man, he's focused on being faithfully obedient with whatever God puts in front of him each moment and leaving the consequences to God. That's what Joseph is focused on. And so Joseph doesn't go, hey, pick me. Hey, I'm right here. I'm who you're looking for. He doesn't do that. But Pharaoh does pick him. Because that question that he asks is a rhetorical question. Can we find anyone like this man? To which the answer is no. So verse 39, then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. Look at this, verse 40. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. Do you see that? Joseph has gone from the pit that his brothers threw him in, to slavery in Potiphar's house, to the prison, and now he's in the palace. He's in the palace. What looked like a lose situation with no hope has completely been flipped upside down. Only God could have done that. Only God could have been the one to elevate him. Joseph couldn't have known enough of the right people to put himself in this position. Only God could have done this. And God did it. And what did Joseph do? Like what did Joseph, like if we're looking at his life, like what was Joseph's role in all of this? Faithful obedience to even the smallest and insignificant and seemingly unseen things. That was Joseph's role. To which you would say, well, that doesn't seem like it produces much. No doubt, it doesn't. But look at where Joseph is. It's so important to remember. Just as we talked about last week, you may be in a waiting season and you may feel like, why does my faithful obedience to God matter in this season? Nobody sees what's going on. Nobody cares. I feel like nobody sees what I'm going through. The pain that I've been in it for years, or I've been in it for a season. God doesn't seem like he cares. God doesn't seem like he's there. Why does being faithfully obedient to God matter? And here's why it matters. Because you have no idea what lies on the other side of your obedience to God. You have no idea what lies on the other side of your obedience to God. There is no act of obedience to God that is insignificant or that is too small to matter in God's economy. God always sees. There is no private matters when it comes to God. No matter how alone and private you feel, as if this being obedient to God doesn't matter. Man, God sees whatever you do, whenever and wherever you do it. Like, being obedient to God matters. And God is always working, even when you cannot see him working. The things that God allows us to see are only a fraction of the things he is doing behind the scenes of our lives. You have no idea all the things that God is doing, and you have no idea what lies on the other side of your obedience to God. Listen, God can open doors you didn't even know existed. He can open doors for you didn't even know existed. And listen, you don't obey out of a motivation to see God do something for you. You obey God because you believe that he's worthy of being obeyed, even if he never does anything else for you. But Joseph, he never voiced, oh God, if you'll do good things for me, then I'll obey you. He just obeyed because he believed that God was worthy, but he trusted that somehow, some way, this dream, this promise that God gave me is going to come true. I don't know how it's going to come true, but I'm just going to be faithfully obedient. And Joseph had no idea which moment of obedience was going to ultimately open the door for the fulfillment of the dream that God had given him. And you don't know which moment of obedience is the one that God may do something through you or on your behalf that you didn't even know that you needed, because you don't know, and I don't know, what lies on the other side of our obedience. And just as I started this message today, I just want to come back to it. You aren't Joseph, and I'm not Joseph. All right? We aren't part of the original salvation story that brought about Jesus. But you do have a story that God is writing. And the way in which God is writing your story is at least in part based upon your decision to be obedient in the moments that God puts in front of you. So when there's something in front of you that God clearly asks you to do, what would happen if you just said, I'm just going to do it? When it looks like there may be a negative consequence, but you're convinced that God is asking you to do something, what would happen if you just said, I'm just going to do it? I'm going to obey God here. What would happen if when the request that God is making for your life doesn't make any sense? What if you just said, I'm just going to do it because maybe God knows something that I don't know, and that his ways are higher than my ways, and that from my earthly perspective, I can't see the big picture? When you hear a sermon or you read something in the Bible that has direct obedience implications to your life, what would happen if you just said, you know what? I'm going to obey it. I'm going to do it. What if you didn't shrug it off, didn't minimize it, but you trusted that it was a word from God for you in that moment, and you just said, you know what? I'm just going to obey God because I trust him, and he's proven that I can trust him through what he did for me, through sending Jesus to die on the cross and rise from the grave. So I'm just going to trust him. What would happen if you just said, I'm going to obey him in that moment? Do you know what would happen? You don't know what would happen. And I don't know what would happen. Because you have no idea what lies on the other side of your obedience. But I promise you this, it's always worth obeying God, even when, especially when, you don't know what lies on the other side. I can't tell you how many times I hear stories because I get a front row seat to hearing stories. That's one of my favorite parts of my job is I get to hear stories of people that oftentimes others don't hear. And the stories that I hear, I can't tell you how many times I hear the incredible story of how God has changed someone's life. And as they're telling me the story, do you know what it was that led so often to God changing their life? It was obedience. They said yes to a prompting from God. They gave their life to Christ. They got baptized. They gave. They served. They went on a mission trip. They did what wasn't popular in their place of business, but they're like, you know what? I serve God, not man, and so I've got to be obedient to God, and I'm just going to watch and see what God does, right? You have no idea what lies on the other side of your obedience to God. For Joseph, being obedient led to 13 years in slavery and prison. It ain't always good. It ain't always enjoyable. But if it's where God has you, then you can trust that he's with you. And if he's with you, we've talked about this throughout the series, then that's so much better than not being in a tough situation without God. Being with God in a prison or a pit is better than being without God and outside of it. You have no idea what lies on the other side. Joseph had 13 years that he never would have chosen for himself. But at what point, here's the question, at which point of obedience did it lead to him being in Pharaoh's presence? You could say the last one, or you could say they were all part of what God used to bring him there. I think the answer is yes, right? Only God could have done what he did in Joseph's life, and you have no idea what God might be doing in your life and what lies on the other side of that single act of obedience. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, verse 41, after he's put him in charge, he tells him again, hey, verse 41, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh, y'all are going to love this. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. Look at this. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and people shouted before him, make way. Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, but without your word no one will lift hand or foot in all of Egypt. Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zaphanath-Paneah and gave him Asenath, daughter of Potipharah, priest of On, thank you very much, to be his wife. And Joseph went throughout the land of Egypt. Do you see the reversal here? Do you see how intentional God was with what Pharaoh did for Joseph? Yeah. He went from the pit, the prison, the slavery to the palace. Like, that's incredible. But do you remember what we started in week 1? Joseph had a robe. Joseph had a robe that his dad had given him. And his brothers strip him of that robe, kill a goat to make it look like he's been murdered. And Pharaoh, absolutely having no idea that somehow Joseph had lost the robe that his dad had given him, lifts him up and puts a new robe on him. Like, that if there's any more evidence that you need that God was the one that did this, is that Pharaoh, someone who didn't worship the one true God, God used to redeem what was lost in Joseph's life. Almost as if to say, I know you feel lost. I know you feel forgotten. I know that robe has been like something that you've probably carried with you that you literally haven't had, but now I'm going to elevate you and give you this robe. He gave him a new robe. And Joseph, verse 46, was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. How old was he when his brothers betrayed him? He was 17. That's where you get 13 years between his slavery and prison. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt. And what was Joseph doing traveling throughout Egypt? He was preparing for the upcoming famine. And how was he going to prepare for the upcoming famine? Well, remember how he interpreted the dream from Pharaoh and what he said, hey, you need to find somebody wise to collect enough food during the years of plenty so that in the years of famine, people eat. That's what Joseph was doing because he was that man. He was saving and storing up during the years of plenty to prepare for the famine. He was following through on what he said the person that Pharaoh put in charge should do. He had been elevated out of the prison, and we don't see at any point Joseph saying, can I go on a vacation? I had 13 rough years. He doesn't say, if God's elevated me and I'm second in command, I can get other people to do this bidding for me. No. You know why Joseph didn't do that? Because Joseph realized that him being elevated and brought out of that prison was not about him. When God elevates you, when God blesses you, when God brings you from a pit, it's always about something and someone greater than yourself. Joseph being elevated wasn't just about him. And it wasn't just about his dream coming true in the way that he thought it was going to come true. It was to save people's lives literally through providing food in the years of famine. And here's just what I want to remind us today, is that when God elevates you, it's not primarily about you. God wants to elevate you for someone else and to serve others. So if you've ever gotten a raise at a job, it may not be primarily and only about your consumption, but God may have given you a raise so that you could do something with it. Listen, I know inflation is out of control. Come on now, all right? I get it. I know that raise isn't going to cover inflation. I get it. But might an elevation in a moment, if you said, okay, God, I'm going to look at this for what you might want to use me for in others' lives. If God gives you a new job where you're promoted, you're now responsible for more people than you've ever been responsible for, or new people and different people than you've ever been responsible for. Do you think that the primary role of your job is just to tell them what to do for you? Or might God want to use you in their lives to make a difference in it? And what if we just all viewed all of our lives currently as being in an elevated position? What if we just all viewed all of our lives as being in some sort of elevated position and we just asked God, how is it that you want to use me? Well, look, Joseph followed through. He did what it is that he interpreted the dream should do. And Joseph, we're told, stored up all these huge quantities of grain like the sand of the sea. And it was so much so that he stopped keeping records because it was so much. And then I want you to see one final passage today, and then next week we'll look at the rest of it. But I want you to see one more thing. Genesis 41, starting in verse 50. That before the years of famine came, so Joseph has been storing up all this food, 2 sons were born to Joseph by Asenath, daughter of Potipharah, priest of On, and Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh. And he said, it is because God, look at this, it is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. The second son he named Ephraim, and he said, it is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. Do you see that? Not only did God elevate Joseph to this role, but he gave him sons And Joseph named them something related to the situation to remind him of what God has done for him. See, what Joseph realized in this moment was that the current reality that he was experiencing was greater than the past hurt he had experienced. I think that's important for us to realize, is that God had redeemed the past for Joseph. And here's what I want you to know today, that the future that awaits you and awaits me is greater than the pain of the past or the present. Like what do we see from Joseph's life is that the future that awaits us is greater than the pain of the present or the past. And it's not just greater, man, it's so much better. God will redeem your past for a future that is beyond what you could imagine. Now listen to me. I'm not saying it will happen in this life. It may not happen in this life. Joseph got out of prison. Maybe the prison that you're in for the rest of your days on this earth. I don't know. Who would I be if I tried to stand up here and guarantee you that the current plight or situation that you're in, that you'll just come out of? That would be malpractice on my part. I don't know. But what do I know? I do know what the ultimate future holds. And let me tell you, the future that awaits you is greater than the pain of the past or the present. Well, Matt, how can you say that? Because of how the story ends. We talked about this last week a little bit, and we talked about how we know how Jesus is going to come back, but I want you to realize today that it's not just that Jesus is going to come back and we're going to be with him, but that God is so good to you and to me that he wants you to know what it is that you're going to experience. And it's described. Like someone saw what the future holds and they wrote it down so that you could know in the present that your future is greater than any past hurts or present hurts. And I just want to read it for you. It's in the very end of the Bible. The last book, Revelation 21. I want to read to you what John saw. He said, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God.'" And then look at verse 4. "He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain. For the old order of things has passed away." He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. No more death. No more pain. How can I confidently say that the future that awaits you will be greater than the present or past hurt? Because the future that awaits you is better than the present or past hurt. There will be nothing that makes you cry. There will be nothing that causes you pain. There will be nothing that would be any reason for you to fear the future or to resent it and think, "Oh, it's not better." No. I don't know a world without tears and pain and death. But there is a future with no tears and no pain and death. And I love how John concludes this. He could have just stopped there. But he wants to make sure that you know and I know that this is real. He says, "He who is seated on the throne said, 'I am making everything new.' Then he said, 'Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true.'" Like, don't try to remember this with your memory. I want you to write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. Like, isn't it so good of God that he tells us what the future holds? Listen to me. We have no idea what lies on the other side of our obedience in this life, but we do have an idea of what lies on the other side of our trust in Jesus. It's no more pain, no more tears, a future that is redeemed. And if he said, write this down, it is trustworthy and true, that means you can take it to the bank. Meaning, you can allow the future of what is guaranteed to, listen to me, motivate your obedience in the present. Because though we have no idea what lies on the other side of our obedience, we know what lies on the other side of our faith. So why wouldn't we do anything other than be obedient in the present like Joseph? Because being obedient in the present is so much better. And it's always worth it. Because whatever is actually on the other side in this life of our obedience, we know what's on the other side of our faith and trust in Jesus when we meet him one day. Like, that's good news. And it's really good news because as good as heaven will be, no more tears, no more pain, no more suffering. The reason we can know heaven will be that good and the reason that we should really look forward to heaven is because of who's there. And who's there is Jesus. And there's nothing or no one better than Jesus. Not only will he turn whatever you're going through into something so much better than you could ever imagine in the future, but he will be there. And you will be with him. And you will realize fully that he really was trustworthy all along. So might we let that reality motivate our obedience to him in the present. We have no idea what lies on the other side of our obedience, but we know what lies on the other side of our faith and trust in Jesus. So this morning, if you've put your faith in Jesus, like you've truly given your life to Jesus, then what I just read in Revelation 21, 1 through 5 is your future. You don't have to wonder if it's your future. Like, it is your future. So let that reality motivate your obedience in the present and just trust God with whatever lies on the other side. But if you've never given your life to Jesus, this morning is the perfect morning to give your life to him. Right now is the perfect time to give your life to him. And how do you give your life to Jesus? It's simply recognizing that you aren't him and that you can't experience what we just read in Revelation 21 in your own strength and in your own trying and in your own hoping. You only experience what we talked about and what we just read in Revelation 21 through someone greater than you taking you there. And that's Jesus. And why can Jesus take you there? Because he did what had to be done to make you eligible, if you will, to be in God's presence. He received the punishment that your sin deserved on your behalf so that you wouldn't have to. And what's the ultimate punishment? It's separation from God. What is heaven? It's being in the presence of God. And so this morning, if you're like, well, I want that, I want Jesus, then you simply give your life to him. Surrender your life and tell him you're ready to go all in and follow him. Tell him that you're sorry for the sin that you committed and you no longer, you want to follow him. If you give your life to him in that way, genuinely and all out, surrendered, then Revelation 21 can be yours too. So Father, we just come to you right now and we just thank you once again for showing us what we need to see in the life of Joseph. And God, right now I just pray for everyone in this room. God, for those who know you and have put their faith in you, God, would what we've seen today just help them recommit, re-up to being obedient to you and leaving the consequences to you. Because we don't know what lies on the other side of our obedience, but God, we're trusting you with it. And God, if anyone here today doesn't know you, then during this next song as we sing about how there really is nothing better than you, as we sing about how you can redeem the past and make it better make it beautiful. God, would they give their life to you for the first time? Father, if there's anyone here that needs to talk with someone or wants someone to pray with them, would they come forward and talk with someone who's here at the front during this next song? But God, would you solidify whatever decision that we need to make in this moment, in this next song? And we pray in Jesus' name, amen.